I should join that caucus at some point. So
Okay.
if we can limit my attendance here till about maybe half an hour or something like that.
Of course. Yep. So without further ado, as I was saying to Joe Heim here, some of you have not been to our usual forums. The forums are usually the second Mondays at 7:30 in the morning. And so we had the chance to bring it online here, which is great. And they are often facilitated by Joe Heim, who is your title still Professor Emeritus at UWL, or are you now just retired?
Yeah, I think I need a new title.
There you go. Be careful, because otherwise ones will be made up for you. So
Yeah, that's happened before, that's for sure.
True. So anyway, Joe, you know the spiel. Take it away.
Well, welcome everybody to the afternoon special edition of the forum, also called Chamber Chat. We have with us today State Representative Steve Doyle. We were hoping to have Senator Schilling, Representative Billings. Representative Billings is in a caucus meeting getting preparation for is that a special session tomorrow, Steve?
We're in extraordinary session tomorrow at 1 o'clock.
Session.
And then the Senate is in on Wednesday.
Okay. And so anyway, we do have Steve Doyle with us, and I know there's plenty of questions to ask. This is not a medical one. If we could ask Steve advice on various medical issues, so we could do that, but of course they're not going to get the right answers anyway. So anyway, Steve, welcome. And what I'm going to do is let you do the normal introduction, talk about what you want to talk about, and then we'll get into the Q&A, and we'll hopefully be done in about a half hour for everybody to hear that.
Sure, that sounds great. So the last week, and especially the last several days, have been pretty intense. There's been a lot of discussions and negotiations. Originally, it started out between the Democrats, Republicans in the legislature and the governor's office. Then I think that the legislature for a while kind of did its own thing with the two houses and the two parties negotiating and said, you know, let's come up with something that we can live with and then present it to the governor's office and see if we can then reach an agreement in 2 steps rather than in 1. I think that made some sense, and they were able to make some progress. So we do have a proposal that is coming out, and it's agreed upon between the leadership for the most part of the two parties. And when I say that, everything is really fluid right now. So there are some things in the package that the Democrats don't like. There's some things in the package that Republicans don't like. But all in all, it is something that I think that a majority in the two houses can vote for. We're expecting a fair amount of no votes, especially in the Senate, it sounds like. In my house, in the Assembly, there will be some no votes. What we're trying to do is to get as many people on board as possible. I think that when you're looking at a situation like this where, you know, we're really in a crisis, obviously, it's better for the two parties to set aside the squabbles and say, okay, it may not be perfect, but maybe, you know, some people need to hold their nose and vote for it even if they aren't particularly happy with it. And you know, there's some things that I would do differently in it, but all in all, I'm a yes vote. And let me just kind of give you an overview of some of the highlights of it. And if you have questions for me, don't expect answers because as I said, the situation is really fluid. Things have changed, but I'll tell you what we know so far. So the one thing that's gotten a lot of attention, obviously, has been the 1-week waiting period for unemployment insurance. There has been pretty much universal agreement that we should waive that, and it'll be waived retroactively. So people who've already gone through that will be able to get, you know, a makeup check or whatever at some time in the future. That 1-week waiting period repeal will last until February 7th of 2021. So for, you know, almost the next year. There's a plan to provide support for major industries, tourism, manufacturing, agriculture, construction, retail, services, and so forth. I don't know the details of that plan. That involves some funding. One of the things that we had wanted was some special programming or funding for destination tourism. We didn't get that, but they're working with WEC and other entities. There are some plans for support. Workers' compensation for workers, first responders who contract COVID-19. You don't have to prove that you got it through work. If you get it and you're a first responder, you're covered. Extensions for prescription orders so that you don't have to be going to the pharmacist, every month or every couple weeks, whatever, so that doctors can actually extend those out a little bit further so that we have fewer people coming in to get their standard refills. For those on here, and I don't see Craig, but he would be happy to know that the CNA bill to lower the training requirement for CNAs, Wisconsin has a higher number of hours that are required. This will lower it permanently to the federal requirement, which is 75 hours. Vaccinations will be covered under senior care. We'll extend renewals of credentials for emergency medical service providers. So if you are a retired person, if you're an out-of-state person, we want to take advantage of people who are willing to come in and basically join the front lines. And so we're loosening that up a little bit. We will require coverage of COVID-19 testing. The bill does not, however, require insurance coverage of treatment, just for the testing. Interest on late property tax payments, those will not accrue interest or penalties if the total amount due on or before October 1st of 2020, if the local government determines that there's a hardship. So right now, this is something that I had learned back when I was county board chair. If you are late on a property tax payment and you have a really good reason and we feel really sorry for you, we don't have any ability as a local government to say, yeah, we'll give you a break, we're going to forgive it. The law simply does not allow us to do that. Here, the law does give local governments the ability to do that. Next one is a requirement for Department of Public Instruction to put on their website a model for schools to return to in-person instruction. Not exactly sure what this is all about. I assume that schools already know how to do in-person instruction, and I'm not sure what they need to be taught about how to teach kids when they're back in the classroom, but apparently maybe some sort of transition type of a thing for evolving from strictly online to picking back up the in-person. That's the list I have. There's several more things on here, but those are the most important things, or the ones that have gotten the most attention. Probably at this point, I can try to answer questions if people have them. And again, I'll warn you, I probably know, I know less than I know about.
Well, one thing, Steve, I'm going to throw a quick one out, maybe a softball question. I understand you have legislation that you have signed on to that will allow for greater amount of mail-in balloting this year. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. The leadership in the state, the Democratic leadership in the state assembly introduced that bill last week. I posted our press release on my Facebook page, and I got more than twice as many views as I have ever gotten for a post on my Facebook page, and 90% was positive. There were a few people that weren't thrilled about it, but here's really what it says is that for 2020, but only for 2020, we would go to a mail-in ballot as opposed to in-person ballot. Now, it's unfortunately turned into a partisan thing where the people who've been critical of it have basically been saying, oh, this is another attempt by Democrats to play games and make it easier for their people and so forth. In the state of Florida, it's the Republicans who are pushing the in-person or the absentee vote by mail approach. In some other states, it's been Republicans. Some states it's Democrats. States of Oregon and Washington have been doing it for several years now. What this bill says is if we would do it, we would need to have an infrastructure, because last week was a disaster. So people were told it's on, it's off, it's on, it's off. And the worst part of the problem was not that it was either in person or by mail, it was that people didn't know. And so if you assumed that you didn't have any option but to go and vote on election day, you didn't necessarily request your ballot ahead of time. And guess what? Then you found out, oops, too late now I have to show up. So what this would say is, if we're going to do it this year, and I think it makes sense to do it because we don't know what the future is going to hold with regard to future waves of the coronavirus peaking. And so to make it safe for everyone, we would say well ahead of time, this is how we're going to do it. These are your deadlines. If you miss these deadlines, too bad, you're not going to be able to vote. Rather than at the last minute saying, oh, you know, we told you the other day that this was your deadline, but now we backed it up. And if you haven't already requested it, then you need to show up on election day. That's the thing that we want to avoid in our proposal. It's not perfect. There are certainly things that could be changed about it. Unfortunately, the Republican leadership doesn't like it, so I'm not optimistic about the future. But I think this is something where if you look at it, it doesn't benefit Democrats or Republicans one more than the other. It is simply something like we're going to hopefully do tomorrow and on Wednesday, where both sides get together and say, you know, this is a different environment that we're in. Maybe we need to do things a little bit differently. Maybe we need to cooperate a little bit more. So we're crossing our fingers. We'll see what happens.
Okay, thanks, Steve.
Sure.
Questions from others?
I've got a question. Steve, on the property tax payments, is that usually on an individual basis, or can a city declare, for example, everyone gets exemption for this time period?
My belief is that it would be on a citywide basis. That I would guess that it's probably an all or nothing. You know, City of La Crosse could say, okay, everybody that's delinquent this year, you're okay. In fact, I don't think that you would want it to be on an individual basis, because then you'd have people picking winners and losers. So I think it's just across the board.
Okay, thanks. Other questions?
And I should say too, there's a little chat bubble down at the bottom. If you're on your computer, the little chat bubble down at the bottom if you wanted to submit something that way. Otherwise, Steve, I'm looking for confirmation of something that I have heard, and that is the safer at home order. I've heard that can only maximum be extended to May 10th. And after that, the governor would need to get approval of both the Assembly and the Senate. Is that correct from your understanding?
Okay, that's a really good question. So the current order expires May 10th. The governor has two options at that point. If he wants to continue it. One is to ask for an extension. The Republican leadership in both houses have said that's not going to happen. His other option would be to say, okay, that one expired, and then the next day issue a new order that would replace that one. And then if the legislature didn't like that, their option would be to then call us back into another extraordinary session to vote down the new order from the governor. Those are the things that we're hearing a lot of talk about, is what's going to happen. I think that it's overly optimistic to say that everything's going to be just fine when we get to May 10th. So what I assume that we're going to see, based upon what the recent history has been, is that we'll get to about May 8th. And then we'll start to figure out what we're going to do. And unfortunately, people are going to be really upset because they're not going to know, am I going back to work? Am I going to be able to, go to a restaurant or a store? Probably not restaurants, to be honest. But, people will be left in the lurch, and it's just not a good way to run government. But, we're getting through this current situation of having a vote tomorrow and Wednesday on this package. I'm hoping that we immediately then shift into the mode of looking at what are we going to do when the current order expires. That might be wishful thinking, but it would make sense.
And for clarity, the current safer at home goes through April 24th, but you're saying he could extend that through the current order to May 10th. Is that correct?
Right, the current, yes, May 10th.
Okay. Any other questions out there? Concerns?
Kids are making it easy on me.
I know.
In regards to the emergency income disaster loans and the payment protection, paycheck protection program, is there anything that the state is doing separate from the federal on that? And then, because I've gotten some emails that said the emergency income disaster loan is depleted already, and so I was just curious on that.
Okay, that's a good question. And the Republicans are very wary of the governor exercising partial vetoes in this package. And so what they have done, and they have been very straightforward in saying this, is that this is not an appropriation bill, because appropriation bills under Wisconsin Constitution are subject to a partial veto by the governor. So they have gone to the Legislative Reference Bureau and Legislative Council to get an opinion on what they could put in this bill to make it so that it's not subject to a line item veto. And, you know, there's just this lack of trust between the legislative Republicans and the governor and the governor's people. And so, you know, neither one really has a lot of faith in what's going to happen with the other side. So the bill that we're going to be voting on tomorrow does not appropriate anything. So the short answer to your question is there anything beyond what the federal appropriation is? No, there's not. We would like to see it, when I say we, I'm speaking for my Democratic colleagues, would like to see a follow-up bill that actually does have some appropriations, because there are most of the stuff from the federal law or from the federal package, the governor has the ability to unilaterally decide how it's going to work. There are some exceptions to that. I don't know the details in that regard. But also there are some things where I think legitimately people may say, we need to take money from here and move it over to there. For example, I have a couple of colleagues that are really concerned about the hit that the university system is taking. And so they would like to take some money from some other areas that have been funded and say, well, you know, it's really more important, since the university basically is going at least a semester without a lot of the revenue that they would have gotten, and putting some of that money over there. That would, you know, once we start doing that and start appropriating money to, you know, different items in the budget, then we start to get into the question of whether the governor can line item. And if there's something in there that fits into that category, then the whole thing could potentially be opened up and, you know, looked at as really kind of where can the governor be creative. And, you know, actually, Brian Rude may want to comment on how that works and how he's seen it in the past, because that is something that we've got a bit of a seeing who blinks first situation going on between the legislature and the governor right now, in terms of what can go in that package and what can't, and how can we help people the best without, you know, that level of trust that we really should have there, and unfortunately don't.
Brian, Steve, not much to add. I think you covered it well. Can you tell us how the session is going to be conducted? It's going to be, some people are going to be there, some are virtual, and how will the public have access to the session?
That's a good question too. So most of us are going to appear just like this. We're going to be doing it through the internet, and it's interesting. Wisconsin law says that you can do that, but it has to be where the presiding officer can see each and every person when they check in. In other words, you know, when you say here, or when you're voting yes or no. So in the assembly, we have 99 people. So the chief clerk is going to go through the roll call and, Steve Doyle, then he clicks me and unmutes me. I say here. He then says Doyle here and unclicks me so that I'm muted again. And then he goes on to the next person. And then he goes on to the next person. So we did a practice session last week. It takes forever because each and every person, well, if you are of my age and greater, you don't understand that technology very well. And so it's a challenge in that regard. But at least we're going to do it. For most people are going to be at home. There will be a few people who will be in the assembly chambers, mostly a couple of leadership people, and it will be covered by Wisconsin Eye, so you're able to watch the proceedings as they occur through Wisconsin Eye. Now, then on Wednesday, flipping over to the state Senate, same type of thing, but obviously the state Senate only has 33 people, so that's a much more efficient type of a process because they're used to actually doing roll call votes, whereas in the assembly we use the machine and push a button to vote yes or no. But this will be the first time in the history of the Wisconsin State Assembly that we will have done a virtual session.
Thanks, Steve. Other questions? Oh,
This one isn't necessarily a question, Steve,
go
more
ahead,
a,
Vicki.
yeah, thank you. This one is more of a comment of what I'm hearing. So obviously the businesses that are shut down are our small businesses, the restaurants, the retailers. And I think it was on a call with Ron Kine where the comment I made was, so this is you have to get everybody, you have to get restaurants to a point where they can open, but the consumer spending isn't going to be there because you still have these people that aren't in jobs. And so there's going to be this ebb and flow of we have to get consumer confidence and consumer spending back, which means we have to get people back in jobs. The people that are on unemployment are the ones that tend to be hourly and don't have the savings there. So I guess if there's a question in this of what role do you see the government playing in stabilizing and boosting that consumer confidence?
I've heard a lot of people comment very favorably about Minnesota's governor talking about really kind of a staged type of reopening and putting some real forethought into it. And I remember one of the comments that he had made is that, we can't open northern Minnesota and not southern Minnesota, for example, because everybody's going to get in their car, they're going to drive up there, and they're going to have, an outbreak up there. So it has to be done as a very careful and thoughtful rollout. I think that the most important part of that is going to be information. I think we need to tell people, here's what's going to happen, and here is when it's going to happen. So rather than simply saying, okay, tomorrow, everybody can go to whatever. You can go through, the grocery store. Well, we can already do that, but let's say that people are really concerned that it's been over a month since they've gotten their hair coloring done. So we're going to allow people to go into the beauty parlor. We can't say that's going to happen tomorrow. You have to say, okay, here is the steps that people can do that. And maybe we would say that it's limited to a certain number of people in the building at a time, as opposed to just simply saying, okay, this type of business or this type of industry just opens tomorrow. I think that and I don't want to emphasize the slowness, but a deliberate process as opposed to a breakneck speed process, I think is the most important. And I'm hoping that the powers that be, both at the state level and at the federal level, are giving some thought to that. I know that the president would like to have it happen in early May, and he can, I guess, use some bully pulpit persuasion and influence, but it's really the governors and the state legislatures that will be making those decisions. And having some consistency, which is what we saw with the Safer at Home order. It was based on the Ohio model of how they did it. So I think if we, find some best practices and implement it that way, that makes the most sense. And we also have to be ready that when that happens, no matter how structured it is, no matter how careful it is, we're going to see some new waves, and hopefully there'll be small waves and not, back into where we have been. But people have to accept that, as soon as we start having people together again, until we have a vaccine in another year or so, we're going to have some things happen. And so you have to draw that line of where is it safest in terms of a balance between the economy and health. I want to put in one other comment here that has nothing to do with your question, but just because it needs to be said, and that is the La Crosse County Health Department is awesome. I mean, I have talked to so many people who have been so impressed by how we have done things here locally. And I know Jen Rombalski probably last slept about 2 months ago, and her staff that, in fact, she sent an email today pointing out not so much about herself, but a lot of her staff that are on salary, they don't get overtime. They're working 14-hour days or more, and other than appreciation, right now they're not getting any compensation for it. I would hope that when this is all over, that not just the counties, but also the state goes back and says, these people really went above and beyond it, and we show some appreciation for that dedication and that appreciation in the form of some sort of compensation, because they have done just a yeoman's job, and I'm really proud of them.
Thank you for that.
Other questions? Steve, what were your thoughts about the lead up to the elections last Tuesday? The various lawsuits, the changes, the flip-flopping. What were your thoughts about what went on the week preceding the election?
It was a travesty. And actually, Steve Lair from Quick Trip and I have exchanged emails on that. And we both came to the conclusion that there is more than enough blame to go around every person, every party. It was ugly. It was way too partisan, and it was not in the best interest of the people of our state. And I would hate to ever see that happen again. We had absolute chaos. People didn't know what to expect. And I was telling people a week and a half out that, we were going to see lawsuits, because both sides have been talking about, they had their lawsuits ready to go. So we knew that was going to happen, and we knew it was going to happen at the end. What we didn't know necessarily was what the outcome of those lawsuits would be. So we really couldn't tell people, yeah, there's going to be a lawsuit, but here's what's going to happen, so you can be ready for it. It was just chaos. I think the best part of it was, if there was a good part, was the creativity that we saw from some people. And there's a former Republican colleague of mine who is the mayor of, I think it's Neenah, who went to the local people that owned the Shopko store that had been closed. And what they did was they rented the Shopko store for election day and allowed people to come in there, big open area, so you didn't have to be on top of each other, and send people to different stations so they could do their voting in person if they needed to, but not be, stacked up like cordwood. And so our local officials, I think, deserve a lot of credit for how they handled things. They knew it was going to be complicated. They knew that it was going to be chaotic at the state and federal level, but they really came through. And in talking with our county clerk here, Ginny Dankmeyer, I know that she had done a lot of lead up work with all of the local clerks. And so they were all ready for whatever was going to happen. They had their, the acrylic glass up, they had hand sanitizer, they had, you name it, they were ready for it. So they didn't fail us, but the people at the state level, they failed us.
Thanks, Steve.
Sure.
Are there any other questions out there? We have Steve go within a couple of minutes here.
Hoping it doesn't take too long. Just quick touching on the unemployment. You mentioned that the waiting period is going to get waived, and that is just for about a year up until February 2021.
That's right.
With the federal rolling out their additional $600, and there's a bunch of confusion there as to what people are actually going to get. Has there been any talk with passing legislation in Wisconsin and how we're going to handle the money coming from the federal for unemployment, or is it just any ideas on that?
Well, you would get your state unemployment and then that federal supplement on top of that. And that, to my knowledge, has been going relatively smoothly in terms of, getting the wheels in motion for that to happen. So those are really kind of parallel tracks, but hopefully they will be, working in tandem in that regard. But, if you're getting unemployment, you're going to get the federal supplement on top of that.
Okay, thank you. I had a couple employees that were asking. Thank you.
Sure.
Steve, there is one piece of information that I've heard, which is the expanded unemployment, which is really for that gig economy, the self-employed, independent contractors, that there's been a long wait for the Wisconsin Department of Workforce Development to get the software updated so that they can apply for unemployment. So there's a pretty big time lag. And my understanding is that the feds have finally pushed the rules down, if you will, to the states, but anything that can be done to make sure that the state DWD is working quickly on that would ease some pain for those smaller business owners.
No, I think that's a really good point, and I have heard from a lot of those people. I have talked to folks that are 1 and 2 person operations that, they're not laid off, they're not fired, they're self-employed. So, they slip through the cracks on so many things in normal times. A woman that I know very well is an artisan. She goes to the different craft shows throughout the summer, and that's her income, and they're all canceled. So what does she do? And so we've tried to put her in touch with the right people to make assistance available to her. On a positive note, we have things like people being able to defer their mortgage payments and so forth. But yeah, I think when we look back on this will be a study in lack of preparedness in so many respects. People have said for years, someday there will be a pandemic, and I don't know that either the federal or the state government was really ready for it. And if they're not individually ready for it, then they're less ready for it when it requires working together and cooperating federal to state together. So, the people at DWD have said, yeah, we're working on it. Yep. We think we're close, but I'm still getting phone calls from those people that are saying, what do I do? What's available for me? But I also would emphasize any business that is eligible for any of that federal money, for covering wages and so forth. I mean, it's not often that, people at our level can get, what I'll call free money, and that is something that the expectation is that if you use it to, you take out this loan to keep your salaries and your staff on board, that will be forgiven at the end if you keep those people. Again, we don't see that very often. If you haven't applied yet, you should do that as soon as you hang up from this call.
There is a question out there in the chat. It says, with the waiting week being approved, will they back pay those that have already been off due to COVID and have since been called back to work? That's the added part to that.
I believe even if you are called back to work, they're making it retroactive. So if you were eligible in a particular week, even if you're not getting it anymore, I believe you're still going to get that week.
Okay. I know you wanted to get to your caucus meeting. Any last minute pressing questions out there?
Vicki, you have any announcements to make for later in the week?
I know we have several webinars coming up, and Steve, if you want to duck out, obviously you don't have to stay here for our announcements, but
Okay.
yeah.
Well, thank you very much.
Yeah, thank
much,
you.
Steve.
Thank you for your time.
You bet.
Let me pull them up here quick because our team has been working hard in the background. I know we have one every single day this week. So tomorrow we have workforce. I think Teresa's on the call here, but Teresa Pierce from our workforce partner, Workforce Connections, and also I believe she's getting somebody from the Department of Workforce Development on. Obviously, that's an unemployment conversation, but also workforce. What are they seeing? Who are the people that are sitting on unemployment, and what does that look like? So that's tomorrow at 3 o'clock. On Wednesday, we focus on health and wellness. So obviously we all need to be managing our mental state as well, making sure that we're staying mentally healthy. On Thursday, we have train. So as many of you know, it was a pretty public announcement that train was had some COVID-19, had an employee test positive. And so train will be sharing what they did for their actions by having a positive employee. And then on Friday, it's helping kids cope with COVID-19. So a lot has been disrupted, right? And we as adults can process it a lot better than our children can. And so I believe we have someone with the parenting place coming on to talk about how do you address that with some that just don't understand that, hey, what do you mean I might not have a prom? Or what do you mean I can't go to Joey's house? And so these are interesting times for our kids. So that's what's coming up on Friday. I know next week, we've heard some interesting things about the PPP, the Payroll Protection Plan. It's really a gamble. So what I mean by that is if you are a business that is continuing to operate, the PPP is amazing, right? Like you have payroll that you are spending, you have these people working and it's getting paid for by the federal government. But if you're not open and you don't have revenue coming in, a lot of the accountants, two of the accountants I've talked to now have said, we're actually telling those restaurants to not apply until a little bit later, because then as you're ramping up to start and you have the payroll expenses, then because you're about to open up, that's the best time to use that. But there may not be funds available by the time they go to use that. And so there's been some articles in there. The Restaurant Association is the National Restaurant Association, let alone the state one, has been talking about how do we get this PPP to work for particularly the restaurants. So again, it's those ones that are closed. So we're trying to get some of those interesting things of what are the accountants advising their clients. Those are some of the golden nuggets that will help our businesses maintain, because you don't want to use some of those programs too soon. It only lasts for 8 weeks. And if this is going to get extended, you want to make sure that you're really maximizing that timeline, because there's already some debate happening at the federal level that could put this next stimulus package in jeopardy, so to speak. It's possible there may not be another one coming. So we have to then take a look at the funding that is there. The EIDL loan, so that is the biggest rumorville right now. So it's the Economic Impact Disaster Loans. EIDL is how the accountant told me he's pronouncing it. I'm like, that makes sense, right? So the EIDL loans, I had heard from the U.S. Chamber that they were out of funds. And so they looked at everything that's been allocated and saying, we can't give all of this. And so hence, I have yet to come across a business that has said they have secured those funds. So my guess, again, unofficial, is they are trying to figure out how to allocate those. But it definitely in several articles has said they are not giving out more than $1,000 per employee. Up to 10,000 is what I have seen. So, but all that being said, a person actually got on with the SBA this morning, which in and of itself is miraculous, and said that he had heard otherwise and that there's lots of rumors out there. So we'll be trying to get to the bottom of it and get some clarity, because everybody wants to know. And the piece that I guess I'll tell Steve afterwards is, it's much easier for businesses to plan if you know an open date. But what he said reinforced what I have been talking to people about, which is knowing how our government operates. This is going to happen really quickly with hardly any notice, and that's not going to work very well for our businesses. And the worst case scenario is this gets extended past when anybody had planned, because how do you budget when you don't know what date you're budgeting for, right? So we really need some assurances from our government that this is going to happen in an organized fashion and a predictable fashion so that everybody can plan financially. So we're hoping to get some of those pieces figured out here, because as I've been talking about, we've pushed a lot of information on businesses and they're processing that and literally applying for funds. Now we've got to talk about how do we get them to maintain, and then how do we relaunch? That's where the conversation needs to start going to, because we will reboot our economy, and doing so in a way that maximizes it is really key. So hopefully we can get that predictability out of government. Any questions, comments? Oh yeah, go ahead, Teresa.
Hey, Vicki, this is Teresa Pierce with
Yeah.
Workforce Connections. We have been unsuccessful so far in getting a representative from you, from UI, to be on the call with us tomorrow.
Okay.
And so, just so folks know, I don't want to misrepresent that. I'm not going to be able to speak to unemployment insurance questions. I can speak to the system and the programs that we have in place already, but any of those specific UI questions, I'm not going to be able to speak to. They will only let the state representative do that, and we just haven't been able to secure somebody. If we get them, I'll let you know, but right now we're still in conversations with them.
Perfect. Thank you for clarifying that, because we
You
don't want
bet.
to misrepresent either. Thank you.
Yep. Okay, thank you.
Well, thank you, everybody.
Yes, thank you all. Hopefully we'll see you later this week. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.